education, education, education is another topic of the day after the Prime Minister announced his pledges for Britain's future students. Rishi Sunak today announced the shake-up of our secondary education system. A single qualification, the Advanced British Standard. This qualification will bring together A-levels and their apprenticeship sibling T-levels. Students will study 5 subjects rather than the current 3, including some form of mathematics, and I'm not sure all my children are delighted about this, Mary, and English up until the age of 18. He claimed this would bring us up the ranks against our competitors, not only with the number of subjects taken, but with the number of hours spent in classrooms and with teachers. Our education system has been broken for too long. It ought to reflect the needs of our economy and not the interests of universities that received huge sums of money for providing second-tier degrees in which the lessons are done remotely or indeed the teachers are on strike. What we need is tradesmen, not gender studies graduates. Well, I'm now joined by former A-level and GCSE examiner Anis Garfield and teacher and founder of the Oasis Charitable Trust, Steve Chalke. Thank you both very much for joining me. Anis, do you think this is a long overdue reform that will really help people and will help the economy?
Long overdue. We shouldn't be wallowing in an out-of-date education system. Our children, our pupils, need to meet the modern world, cope with the modern world. Some of them do want to go to universities. I see that there's a good swipe at universities, which is a good thing, but some people don't care. Some children, pupils, don't care about economic success. They want to take interest in humanities. And they should be allowed to go to university. But on the other hand, a lot of children want employability. They want jobs ready for them to go into a job, and they should be catered for in our schools.
Because Rishi was pretty critical of the 50% target, wasn't he, that Labour set. Do you think this is a target that it's worth getting rid of formally?
Absolutely, and I was very surprised at you quoting our Labour Minister, Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who said education, 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 without defining it, saying 50% should go to universities without defining what they should do at these, what are known as Mickey Mouse universities, and what Rishi Sunak refers to as rip-off degrees.
And Steve, do you agree with that? Do you think that getting rid of that target is sensible, or it's not just about education, it's also about the type of society that we ought to want to achieve?
I think it's about all of those things, Jacob. And I think that what Rishi Sunak said today about A-levels, T-levels, combining them, I think that's a wonderful aspiration. My concern about it all is, of course, that this will not kick in for anyone except those who just entered primary school at the very beginning of reception classes this year, 2036, it makes any difference. So the question is, what happens now? And I've got some other questions as well. When the Prime Minister talked about government failing for the last 30 years and he was going to turn that around, I think for all educationists, they wouldn't recognise that figure at all, 30 years. They talk about the last 13 years of education being squeezed. And the Prime Minister didn't talk about the priorities that I hear our staff and other staff in other schools. We run 54 schools around the country. But as I talk to educationists, their priorities are different. Whereas they think it's fantastic that we do something decent with 16 to 18 education, 16 post-16 education. Their priorities, as I'm sure you know, are absenteeism, mental health, the fact that what Sir Kevin Collins said we needed, 15 billion to sort out the mental health issue, never came. Their issues are about the retention of teachers because of the very poor resources in the classroom. Their issues are about an education all the way through that's wide enough to hold every child there. What about neurodiversity, etc.?
But Steve, this will widen education. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the other bits. But this will widen education by making people do 5 subjects rather than 3. There'll be an up to £30,000 tax-free bonus for teachers teaching core subjects. So there will be money for teachers. Isn't that very welcome and positive from your point of view?
of course, all that's welcome if it comes about, but it's a long-term time in the future. I think what educationists were concerned about, and I think would be flabbergasted that the Prime Minister didn't talk about 14 to 16 education as well, because as you all know, better than I do, even those who introduced, Ken Baker, Conservative Secretary of State for Education, who introduced GCSEs and assessment at 14, says that that's not fit for the modern world. So for me, none of this really went far enough. And the bit that does go far enough, I agree about the A-levels and T-levels, is almost like a pipe dream. It's so far in the future. Those are my questions about it. I don't know how you see it.
Anis, are you concerned about this, that it's all too far off before anything actually happens? And also, there's dismissing of everything that's happened in the last 30 years. I personally think the Gove reforms from 2010 were really very important and very successful, and the work done by Nick Gibb on reading has been transformational.
It's very difficult. You've got to have ambition. You've got to plan for the future, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I'm sure Mr. Chalke has a very good idea. He's got very good colleagues. He's a teacher himself. And if we had more teachers like him, and how do we attract them? And let children study what they want to, instead of being compressed into narrow set book subjects at A-level. Our A-levels are restricting this baccalaureate type system, and I don't know why it wasn't introduced when it was first mooted. A father was on the committee that recommended it. But then we went to GCSEs. Now, Mr. Chalke, do you think GCSEs and ASs were a good idea?
Well, I'm afraid we've got to draw the conversation to a conclusion there. But thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry. We've got to move on. But thank you very much to Anis and Steve. And I think we all know, everyone knows, that there are teachers who turn out to be absolutely inspirational to the people they teach. I saw that in my own education, and I see it with my children.